evening and welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, a series of conversations with startup founders and investors who fund them. I'm Chris Gill, President and CEO of SVASE, the Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs, and tonight we have something different. Tonight we have the opportunity to talk with Raija Rapo and Marita Suelamo-Vargas, who are Finnish journalists based in Silicon Valley, who've written what I think is an outstanding book about the experience of Finnish entrepreneurs and startup companies coming to Silicon Valley looking to get business and venture funding. So Marita and Raija, welcome to you. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me start a little bit and tell me, what was the inspiration for writing this book?
Well, like you said, there's some outstanding stories in the book, and both Raija and I have been covering Finnish companies who come to Silicon Valley looking for American markets, and we have been doing that for about 10 years. And we had seen some amazing people, amazing entrepreneurs, and we wanted to document their stories. And we thought that this could be really useful for other entrepreneurs, be them, they might be from Finland or maybe some other countries, and collect those experiences and some of the lessons that they had learned.
Because as journalists and writing news stories, we just met the companies once or twice. And then if they, for example, went back to Finland, they didn't succeed, we never heard about them. So it was our feeling that we need to find out what happened afterwards, and because we had been here a long time, we had seen the stream of people, we wanted to look at it closer. And so we were trying to find a publisher for our idea. We totally agreed that this could be a nice story and a nice book. And then we contacted Tekes, which is the technology agency in Finland, and they have offices in Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. So they got really interested in the idea, and they said, we can use this. We can give this book to the entrepreneurs who are planning to come to Silicon Valley, and then they can read everything what is in the book, and then afterwards they can ask questions. So it saves a lot of work. We don't need to explain everything. They can do it. For example, they can read it when they fly from Europe to San Francisco, and then they are ready to get more information.
Okay, so we're going to dive into the book and hopefully be able to give some examples of it. But how did you both get to be journalists over here in Silicon Valley? I meet lots of entrepreneurs from around the world, but I don't meet that many journalists. How did you get to be journalists here?
Well, I moved here with my husband when he was transferred. We were living in Brussels, Belgium, and I was working as a correspondent. I was covering European Union and other European stories for Finnish media. And then we moved here, and obviously, Silicon Valley is a big story. Right. And the biggest stories were in business, in technology, and I started covering those for a major business weekly in Finland.
And Raija, how about you?
Well, I was working in local newspapers in Finland, and then I moved to France, where I started to write about business and technology for Finnish business daily Kauppalehti. And then when we planned to come to the US, I was asking my paper if they were interested in Silicon Valley stories, and they said, this is great. Of course we want to know what happens in Silicon Valley. I came first time '89, and I have been to other countries since then, but I have been covering the business and technology about 13 years here. It has been a great time.
Okay, terrific. So how did you go about finding companies to talk with, and what were some of the common factors you began to find out about them?
Well, I think to answer your first question, how did we find the companies? We obviously had interviewed many of them, so we went through our list of contacts and what are the companies, and we would go back and think, well, what was that one company that we talked to like 10 years ago?
Right.
And trying to find them and trying to find what are they doing now. Some of them had moved elsewhere. And some of the companies, were easy to find because they're still doing business. Some of them are doing great.
And also we talked with Tekes, the publisher.
Right.
They have had people here since a long time and they had their own lists. So we just gathered. We didn't actually plan to have every single company which came, but the major IT companies which were coming here. And I guess we had most of them in the book.
Okay.
And they represent the different different years and different sectors.
So you had something else?
Well, we decided we're not going to have larger companies like Nokia, for instance. So
right.
It was clear that we, focusing on startups and small and medium-sized companies.
Well, what was the main reason that the startups were coming to Silicon Valley? Was it to get customers and sales? Was it to get venture funding? Was it a combination of what was the main driving force to come here?
Well, at the time, so our book covers about 10 years, and the first years are in 1998, 99, and that was a time when Silicon Valley was sort of the mecca. It was the Shangri-La. It was, in Finland, IT companies looked to Silicon Valley and said, well, that's the place to be in. And so what we found out actually, and we list this in one of the chapters in the book, is that there were several different reasons that companies came to Silicon Valley, and there were also some companies that didn't really think about it very much, and they just came because they thought Silicon Valley is the place to be, and there's so many, the world famous and most advanced and successful IT companies are here. So some of the reasons that we found where some companies already had markets here, they had customers, and they were especially mobile. Finland had a lot of expertise in mobile, and they were more advanced in Finland and Europe than in the US. And there was a cluster of internet security companies that saw America as a big potential market.
Okay. So they most of them had European customers, and they were expecting that they can expand to the US. And some companies had first US customers, and they came here, and there was demand for some products, clearly a demand. So they wanted to come closer to the customer and closer to the market.
So they were a little bit more advanced than being what we would call in Silicon Valley a startup with. They did have customers, albeit some of them may have been in Europe, but they had a product, they had customers, they got revenue, they had things moving.
Yeah, not profitable yet.
But not profitable.
But they had a good start. And of course these adventurers who just came, they had found in their budget some money, and they came, which is important that they came, because if you don't come here, you don't know what happens here.
Okay. So just to put it in context, America's got 300 odd million people. What's the population of Finland?
5 million.
5 million. So there's a huge difference in the potential of the market. So you can see an immediate reason why people would want to come here.
Absolutely.
Much bigger market.
Yeah.
So okay, for companies coming here, for the ones that you interviewed, can you tell some of the initial stories of what they found when they got here? Wow,
there's so many. I say, I think what is it, chapter 2 or 3 in the book, but there's so many great stories, and I gotta say, some of the entrepreneurs were so impressive, and what they went through. One of the funny stories is Eero Terikorpi, who came. He's one of the pioneers, sort of the grand old man of the Finns over here.
Who is consultant now.
Yes.
But he came here with his own company. And you're talking about when he was driving on the highway. Yeah, please continue.
So he's driving on the highway, and in Finland he already had a cell phone. This was the late 1990s, and he's driving the highway. He thinks, well, I don't know anybody here. It didn't. There was no network really for Finns at that time, and that's, I think, is one of the key differences 10 years ago and now. Because now when the entrepreneurs come, there's already a network of Finns and who've done it, and you can at least go and meet somebody, another Finn, and they can introduce you to people. But Eero Terikorpi knew nobody. So he's driving on the highway and he's thinking, well, I'm so alone here. I really don't know anybody. And he's thinking, I wish I could call somebody. But then you realize that, the cell phone doesn't even work. Because really not even a cell phone system, working as it did in Finland. But who would I call? Because I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
So really they went through great hardships and just, it was tough.
Mm-hmm. And many companies who later succeeded, they just came here and they rented a lousy office. They hardly had more than a table where to put the laptop. Right. And then one internet security company, they told how they brought computers from Finland because that was the most economic way to start the company. And then they tried to organize the meetings with the customer at customer's place, in order not to show their own offices.
Right.
But they succeeded. And then there were other companies who had more money, and then it was the great boom. When the boom was the greatest, they just spent money and they didn't get so much results.
Right. So if we move past the dot-com era and into more of this century now, so the last sort of 5 years or so, is it the same pattern, that it's still companies that have generated revenue, have had some success in Europe, that make the move, or does it tend to be newer companies going global from the outset?
I would say it's the latter. The new generation of entrepreneurs, and they are much more sophisticated and they're much more global from the start. We had several companies there, like Jaiku is a good example. They were acquired by Google. The company was less than 2 years old.
Wow.
And from the outset, I think the first 5 employees were all, the first, I think the 2 or 3 were from Finland, but the rest were elsewhere. One was in New Zealand. So they really they recognize that they need to be international from the very start. And when they come to Silicon Valley, they're quite sophisticated in how they network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so seeing that side of it, I see lots of entrepreneurs coming from around the world to Silicon Valley. From outside Silicon Valley, it's paved with gold. Mm-hmm. This is where you come to make it all happen. What were the characteristics of the Finnish entrepreneurs that came here that made them successful? Were they all generally successful, or you said some of them had to go back? What were the characteristics that made them stand apart from others?
That's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the technological know-how is very good in Finland. It still is, and early 2000 it still worked. A good technology was selling quite easily. Now it's totally different story. You need to do your marketing, you need to know your customers. But the people, I think now Finns understand much better the importance of marketing, hiring local people, and understanding how to do when you go global.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would say, so you're asking about the characteristics of the people who are successful. Well, one I think is perseverance, and just simply not giving up. I mean, that's very clear. And in Finland we call that sisu, which is like, just don't give up. And
right.
with some examples of that. Being international and open-minded, flexible, really good communication skills, being willing to open up and share what your company is working with others while you're networking, and then recognizing that it's a give and take, and adapting to the Silicon Valley way of doing business. One thing we realized was that, or we learned was that if you know those people who come here and expect to do business as they do in Europe, that's not going to work. You got to understand how Silicon Valley works, and it's just, you know, some of the characteristics we list in our book. We call it the Silicon Valley mindset, and people just need to adapt to it. And those who do, they generally do a lot better than the ones who try to fight it and just think that they can do everything they do back in Europe.
Right. Well, one part of the Silicon Valley mindset for startup companies and entrepreneurs anyway is that it's okay to fail, which is one thing that sets Silicon Valley apart from, the rest of the US, let alone the rest of the world in many cases. What's the general Finnish culture with regard to failure? Is it accepted over there? Is it okay, or is it?
It's very bad to not
really?
to succeed.
Okay.
You're not considered trustworthy if you fail. I think it is getting better now. There are people who are serial entrepreneurs and they have failed, and things are moving to the direction of Silicon Valley mindset in this too.
But that means for the people who took the risk to come here, particularly in the early days, that's an extremely brave thing to do.
Yes, yeah.
You're very
right. They were brave people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in Finland, so failing, it's shameful, but also in Finland, taking risk is almost, it's not really looked down upon, but it's not really encouraged. So in Finland, you know, it's sort of easier to succeed if you don't put your head above the crowd. And entrepreneurship in Finland is not really appreciated as much as it is in Silicon Valley. Here it's, you know, you're a hero if you're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
In Finland, you know, you're a hero if you are CEO of a large company. Traditionally, and as Raija said, it is changing. When we have a saying in Finland where they say if you reach for the top of the high tree, you will fall, and you know you will fall into the bushes. Whereas in Silicon Valley, people say, you know, you reach for the moon and you land with the stars.
Yeah.
So you know the mindset is very different in Finland.
Okay.
But
or has been. It's changing. But
yeah, these entrepreneurs are younger. Some of them have been in the US or elsewhere abroad as exchange students. They have language skills, and they are more curious about the world when they come, and they are ready to take the risks. And of course, they know much more. This is internet era. You can get so much information, and if you're on Facebook, you're global.
Right. Now, I know there were several Finnish companies over a number of years came to our annual product launch event, Launch Silicon Valley. You know, Fogscreen springs to mind because we used their screen to actually show. People were walking through their fog, which was a very fun thing to be doing. What happened to companies like that? What happened to Fogscreen, which seemed to be a terrific innovation at the time?
It is. It's quite spectacular, and so unfortunately, they were one of the companies that during the latest downturn, they cut back their staff in Silicon Valley, and now they're doing, at least when we checked about half a year ago when we finished the book, they were doing their sales from Helsinki.
Okay.
But you know the product is still doing well. It's a very unique product, and they're looking for funding.
Are there other examples you can give us of companies that have succeeded in Silicon Valley?
Well, the biggest success is of course MySQL,
Right.
and that's we dedicated a whole chapter. It's a fantastic story, and we learned so much that we didn't know when we were just reporting about that company. For instance, we learned that at least 2 or 3 times during the history of the company, things just didn't go right, and there were unexpected developments that could have killed the company. Even at the very last stages when they were starting to negotiate with Sun Microsystems. So that's an exciting story.
Can you give us some examples of some of the things they stumbled on and overcame?
They had a supplier, Innobase DB, which provided storage for the database, and they had it's a Finnish company, so they had proposed to buy it, and somehow I think the CEOs did not get in good discussions about acquiring the company, and then Oracle bought it, and it was very critical for MySQL. So that was kind of earthquake for the company. But the CEO Morten Mikkos, he had an excellent strategy to go through it, and the community, the open source community, MySQL community, repaired the situation, creating quickly the new storage.
And then MySQL is an example of a company that they became sort of a media darling.
Yes.
And Mikkos knew the value of PR, and he did it extremely well. So this was one of the cases where, writing this book, we learned, for instance, this story, the InnoDB story, in a very different way than we did when we reported on it. Because Mikkos would go in public and say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We can do fine without." Innobase.
Right.
Of course, now we're learning that. You
go, geez, this was critical to
Yeah, exactly.
You can kill the dolphin drinking the ocean, or something like that. What he said.
Yeah, he was really exceptional in how he held up in public, and
So how many Finnish companies, do you have a number that have come to Silicon Valley in the last 10 years or so?
Well, we interviewed about 40 people from about 40 companies, but not everybody came to Silicon Valley.
But somehow had business in Silicon
somehow.
Valley.
So, and when you say they come to Silicon Valley, not everybody started established an office here. Some of them just came, and they might have
virtual offices. Or
what about ones that didn't stay here, that couldn't get a grip here? Was there any characteristic or any common thing that you found that people were doing or not doing that caused that to happen?
I guess one of the things that some of them moved to East Coast or other parts of US, which is okay. Your first location is not the good one, so you move elsewhere. I think they didn't really understand that you need to be where your customers are or your potential partners. So they didn't exactly have a strategic plan when they came. But of those about 40 companies, I guess only 4 or 5 or something, they really went back to Finland.
That's a pretty good rate. If 90% stayed here and were successful here, that's a very good rate.
Although they were successful, but none of them, or not many of them, except MySQL, really grew big. Or the results were relatively modest, I think, for most of them.
Yeah, and one thing that is going on here too, that we looked at 9 exits that had a Silicon Valley connection. So either they were bought by a Silicon Valley company, or there was some connection through Silicon Valley. So that's some of the companies were acquired. So
And one of the things we talked about earlier on was some came to get sales, some came to get venture funding. What was their experience in securing venture funding?
Oh, it's hard. It's so hard. And I think that's, if you're looking for, as a startup, if you're looking for venture funding in Silicon Valley, that's, I think our chapter is helpful in that. And I don't think Finnish companies realized, and venture funding in Finland was at very early stages. It's not nearly as mature as it is in the US. And of course, the Finnish companies didn't have connections here.
Right. But were they successful in raising venture capital in when they were looking for it? It might have taken a long time, might have been tough, but did they actually raise venture capital?
MySQL was. So
Right.
they got benchmark capital. And there were a few who got affiliates, London affiliates of Silicon Valley VC firms.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very, very hard.
Okay.
And even now, the venture capitalists recommend that first you need to get venture funding from Europe, Finland, Europe, and then only after that come to ask at Menlo Park or elsewhere.
Right. So it would be get that first, then come here. Do you have to have your headquarters here, or? Yeah.
Yeah, preferably.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
have your headquarters here, and then maybe get some customers.
Well,
Way
way before.
Way before.
Before you have your headquarters here.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, so get money in Europe, get customers, get your headquarters here, and then go and look for venture funding.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come without any of that expecting to get venture funding.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
There were some companies that dreamed about it, but it
Yes.
remained a dream.
Okay. We're unfortunately running out of time. 30 minutes has gone just like that. There's a whole load more I could ask you about. Is there any last words of advice for entrepreneurs coming from overseas to Silicon Valley?
Well, I would say that the book is available as a PDF on the TechES website,
Oh, that's terrific.
and it's free. So we think there's quite a lot of useful
Yeah.
information.
And it's part of the critical homework before a company comes to Silicon Valley.
I've read the book. I thoroughly endorse that. It's a great resource for people coming from overseas to read the experiences that they've had here. So thank you very much for writing the book. I think it's a tremendous book that you've written here. And thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate you coming along. Great to see you both here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's good night from the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, and I look forward to seeing you again next month.